This is a review of the 1967 film Up the Down Staircase, directed by Robert Mulligan, who directed To Kill a Mockingbird and The Summer of 42, and starring Sandy Dennis as a young teacher in an inner-city school in New York City. This movie has just under 2,000 votes on IMDb and a rating of 7.4, which is a travesty. This is a phenomenal movie, hugely underrated and underseen. I think that this movie was pretty well known when it came out in the 60s. It's adapted from a book, and I think the book was fairly well known, but I'm not sure if it's very well known by this generation or these days, which is too bad because it is still a hugely relevant movie, and I think it is the best movie about school that has ever been made. Now, note, I say the best movie about school, not the best movie set in a school, right? So you might think of movies like Heathers, or Rushmore or something like that. Those are movies that take place in a school, or at least partly in a school, but I don't think those movies are really about school exactly. This movie is about a young teacher, right? It's about her experiences in this school, but it's also really about the school. It's about the education system. It's about ideologies of teaching and whatnot. It's about the other teachers. It's about the counselors. It's about the principals. It's also about the students, right? About their lives. It's about race and class. It's about a lot of things, but mainly, like I said, it's about school in a way that, man, I don't really know if any other movies that I've seen come close to that. There are things like The Blackboard Jungle or To Sir with Love. I haven't actually seen either of those movies. I think that they both tend to follow characters a little bit more and have a little bit more of a character-driven plot, whereas this really is a broad movie about education, which is really cool and really insightful without being heavy-handed. A hilarious movie as well, as sort of a comedy. This is just a great movie through and through. I will say one other note in the comparison to other movies about school is that sometimes The Dead Poet Society is thrown around as a movie being about education. Personally, I don't really think it is. Again, more of a movie about school. It's also a movie about some, private school in the Northeast, which to me is a much less compelling setting than an inner city school in New York. And like I said, I think the movie mainly focuses sort of on the personal lives of the students there, but the educational aspects of it, the Pritchard book and whatnot, to me are contrived and are not sort of the true and important issues of education in America, which is what Up the Down Staircase is about. But what happens in this movie? Well, this is a great movie that really doesn't need a lot of explaining, so I don't want to spoil anything about it. Really, I think you should just stop this review here and go watch it. But, if for some reason you don't want to, give you a little bit of interest, some interesting things about this, some ideas about what it's about, and some of the things I particularly liked about it. So this movie is probably a good movie to watch for anyone who's interested in Teach for America, right? Teach for America, program that takes young, idealistic, naive college students and puts them in some of the toughest teaching environments in the country. Who knows if that's really a good strategy? Could be, maybe not, I don't know. But this movie has sort of a young teacher who I think went to Notre Dame, and Sylvia Barrett is the name of the teacher. In the movie, it's played by Sandy Dennis, I should mention, who's phenomenal, does a phenomenal job in this movie, as do most of the actors. She finds herself at the school in inner city New York, one way or another, and has a huge class, a homeroom of 42 people or something like that. Students from all over the place, lots of black students, lots of poor students, also students that seem to be of sort of an Irish or an Italian descent, and whatnot. So these days, when we think of inner city schools, I think we mainly think of black schools. But this movie in the 60s, and in New York, there's quite a bit of representation for other ethnic minorities, which is interesting. There's a prominent sort of Jewish comedian sort of character as a student that's a really interesting and strong character. I think Lou is his name. And whatnot. So there's a huge range of students in here, but it's without a doubt a difficult situation. Lots of students with difficult lives outside of school, and who have all kinds of interests inside of school, which may or may not be education. Of course, there are also upstanding students. There are know-it-alls in the class, such as this guy Harry, who's the president of the student government, basically, who's a phenomenal character, like most of the characters in this movie. Basically, he's a huge pain, always wants to make big statements. Yeah, he's a know-it-all. There's a great moment with this character later in the movie. I won't spoil it, but man, so many just lovely little stories in this, and in general, I think you get the sense after watching this movie for about 1 minute, you realize this must have been adapted from a book, and the book must have been written by somebody who was actually here. Just all of the small details, all of the little stories that they managed to put in this movie in just the right places. Seems like there's no way that this could have been pulled from someone's brain. This had to be culled from real experiences, and it was. And that absolutely shows, and man, that's a good thing, usually. Let me mention a couple interesting technical aspects before we go on to some of the other strengths. One thing that's cool about this movie is that it has a lot of handheld footage, which really adds a lot of authenticity. It was also seemingly shot on location, at least in part. So, a lot of movies in the 50s, the cameras are locked off, they're on tripods, and everything is filmed on a soundstage, right? So to Sir with Love and The Blackboard Jungle, like I said, I haven't seen either of these two movies, so don't take this, but I suspect that those are filmed in that manner, sort of static camera, and on sets, probably. This movie has a lot of handheld footage where they're going through the hallway of a real school or they're going down real streets in New York City, and that does wonders for just the texture and the authentic feel of this movie. You don't see a ton of New York, a couple of streets really, but it still feels like really an interesting time capsule of the city. I do wish that it had shown a little bit more stuff from New York, but oh well. One other technical aspect that's worth mentioning is that the score to this movie is kind of quirky. I think it's probably the worst thing about the movie, to be honest. It seems like part of it was played on the recorder, maybe, or it might be an organ. I'm not really sure. The score is kind of quirky, almost like medieval sounding at times. It's fine, I guess, but it's a little weird. It is, if you're not interested in the movie, I would just suggest looking up on the internet. The main theme from Up the Down Staircase is quirky. It's one way to put it. But like I said, as soon as you actually get into the movie, you very quickly realize, like, wow, this is real. So many little things. Like, for instance, the first day of school, filling out the Delaney cards, right? I guess that's a system for attendance or for tracking students in New York City schools, mainly. And it's all these little details like that really come together. There's a lot of nice moments at the beginning, too. Of the teacher sort of being overwhelmed, right? Not being able to get into the door of the school, not being let into the elevator because they think she's a student because she looks so young and whatnot. And really, the beginning of the movie will make you feel pretty anxious. Will make you feel like, uh-oh, this woman is just going to get absolutely eaten alive by the students and whatnot. I hope that she can, yeah, man. I hope that it works. And the beginning of the movie sort of alternates, I think, between really feeling anxious for her and also being a bit of a comedy, because it's kind of there's sort of interesting dynamic here, because ostensibly this teacher is sort of the protagonist and whatnot, and the students, in terrorizing her to some extent, have an interesting dramatic position here. Are they the bad guys necessarily? Well, not really. You could fall into a trap, I think, pretty easily of having the students be unsympathetic and whatnot. But the movie, I think, actually has just the right mix of being a very light touch with some of the student stories, also, though, addressing how serious some of the ideas and the stories are and whatnot. But one of the ways that it manifests in the beginning is that a lot of the things that they do are funny, right? And in a lot of the ways, you're like, yo, these students are great. Like, it's lit. What can I say? This seems like a lot of cool kids and whatnot. And it's great that can coexist. Your, sort of empathetic view of the students being fun and cool and whatnot, and just, full of energy, that can coexist with your empathy for the teacher who you feel quite anxious for. So like I said, in the beginning of the movie, you have these sort of dual thrusts of feeling anxious for this young teacher, but also it's pretty funny, both the way that they sort of satirically lampoon various aspects of the school and whatnot, and some of the antics of the students. And overall, I would just say that it opens up as an incredibly vibrant and incisive movie that has a lot of really fine details, a lot of strong characters, and some really great sort of satirical moments. This is not a movie that's satirical in the sense that it's hugely exaggerated, but they do a great job of just picking out little moments that speak a lot. For instance, the nurse at the school informs the teacher at some point that the nurses are not allowed by law to touch the students in any way, to apply bandages, to do basically anything that you would expect a nurse to do and whatnot. And that is real. I mean, that was the case at the high school and all the schools that I attended, I think. And so in some ways, it doesn't, that might not seem like satire and whatnot, but the way they play it is just sort of a very subtle, just sort of a subtle selection of interesting snafus in the education system and whatnot. The beginning of the movie opens sort of as a sort of expands outwards somewhat casually and whatnot. It doesn't start off as, and is for the most part not a movie that's going to have the action is like one event follows the other or whatnot. It's this huge, like, really chronological, one clue leading to the next clue, leading to the next clue, leading to the next clue. In the beginning, it's much more of sort of a sketch of the first day and whatnot. And, here's the teacher in the homeroom. Here's the teacher eating lunch and whatnot. One scene sort of just kind of flows into the next, but they don't really, like, one scene doesn't exactly set up another, but you just see the various parts of the day and whatnot, which is sort of a nice way to start the movie. And in general, the movie remains sort of tableau-esque like that for most of the movie. It's not sort of an action movie where there's a bunch of clues and whatnot, but as things go on, stories start to emerge, and you get to know more and more about various characters. Okay, I'll give you maybe two more interesting things from the movie. So one of them is the second day, basically. Now, it's not clear if this is actually the second day, but it's the second day that you see the teacher. She comes in she comes to class with a big box of chalk and some erasers and a mat for her desk, all of which she has purchased on her own because the supplies at the school are non-existent and whatnot. They say on the first day at one point, like, she needs extra chairs for her classroom. There's broken glass in her classroom. There's no chalk and whatnot. She asks someone about chalk. They say, we're out of supplies. She says, out of supplies on the first day. Yep. Like I said, there are sort of semi-satirical elements of this movie, but by no means, it's a rough situation, but by no means is the main thrust of this movie, wow, look how bad the situation is, look how lousy the circumstances is. That's a part of it, but there's so much more to this movie than just being like, oh, they have no chalk or anything like that. But, okay, so on the first day, your view of the character is she's this young teacher, gets mistaken for a student. She's coming out of this school. She's an English teacher, by the way, which is significant. And out of place, and you think, what's she doing? This naive, person, man, she's just going to get totally eaten alive and whatnot. And in some ways, you almost don't fully empathize with the character. In some ways, like, I guess you feel for her predicament in some ways, but like I said, there's this little sort of tinge of naivete that maybe distances you from the character a little bit. Well, the second day, she comes in with her own chalk and whatnot, and just a bit of determination that is extremely endearing, and I think completely gets you on board with the character, and this is where the movie really starts to function and whatnot. And a lot of this comes down to great acting by Sandy Dennis, who is able to capture this character who is determined, clearly has been sort of a successful student, and is a committed intellectual in some ways, but is also going to be hesitant at times and is going to be overwrought at times. And balancing that out is really tricky, showing her being frustrated and whatnot, but also showing her to be a character who really perseveres and a character who really believes in what she's doing and believes in teaching and believes in her students and whatnot is a really tricky balance to strike, to not create this teacher as like some hero and whatnot, some sort of superhero who's just going to be amazing and is always going to have the answers and whatnot, right? Sylvia Barrett definitely does not. She definitely struggles. But like I said, on the second day, there's just this glimmer of determination and whatnot that is, completely sells you on the character and the movie, I think. a further note on the acting is there are some mannerisms in some like physical mannerisms that are really strong in the performance from Sandy Dennis. So there's a way that her character, Miss Barrett, tilts her head, for instance, and a certain sort of frown, not like that, but a certain sort of frown that she uses a couple of times that are just really strong physical mannerisms that work so well in the performance, and just they just ring so true, and yeah, so overall really strong acting. Totally works as the main character of this movie, but as sort of a complex character. Like I said, she's an English teacher, and that's kind of significant. This glimmer of perseverance sells you on the character, but there is still a bit of an undercurrent of naivete in some ways. And like I said, it's a bit significant that she's an English teacher and whatnot. Where English is, there are some of the characters who, there's one of the characters who works all night, right, and sleeps through class a lot because he's been working as a mechanic all night. And his mother asks, what the heck is the point of English for this guy? How is that going to help and whatnot, right? And a lot of the stuff that is done in the class is, sort of, this is the 60s, so the people who are teaching English in the 60s are teaching, pretty old stuff, pretty old pedagogy and whatnot. Some of which, it's still, you still read Dickens in high school, probably, and things like that. But, this sort of focus on poetry and whatnot, it is very distant it is very distant from the realities of an inner-city school and whatnot. And that is another significant part of this, that her character, despite being endearing and having this perseverance and whatnot, there is a glimmer of, this is kind of an odd thing and whatnot. And the what she's teaching and why are not, there are complications in the movie and whatnot. Okay, couple other important things. So hugely important about in this movie are the ideas of race and class and whatnot. Lesser movies would make this into a morality play, would be didactic, would be preachy or something along those lines, would show people that actually if you work hard at school, you can overcome X, Y, and Z, or things like that. Or maybe they would say, hey, even if you do work hard in school, you can't overcome X, Y, and Z. And who knows if either of those perspectives is entirely true on their own, probably not. This movie doesn't really make very many conclusions. It allows a lot of perspectives to speak, mainly through the voices of students, right? So there are a number of times where race and racial issues are debated in the class, one way or the other. And those moments end up being powerful. And Miss Barrett, there are some questions that are put to her for racial and class-based issues that she really doesn't have the answer to, and that really shake some of the ideas of education to the core, as it should be. And yeah, at the end of the day, I mean, like I said, this is a movie about basically everything related to education and schooling. But it's not a didactic movie that answers any of those questions. It's a movie that brings the issues to the surface and lets them sort of speak for themselves, which is powerful and whatnot. The final thing I'll say about this, I think, is that I think maybe my favorite part of the movie is just all the characters in the school, whether this is students, right? I mentioned already the know-it-all student, or this is the mechanic student and whatnot. There's the tough guy from the streets. There's the comedian and whatnot. And these sound kind of tropey, and some of them are a little bit tropey, but some of them are pretty strong and work both as empathetic characters and also as funny characters and whatnot. So they show serious issues that people face in their home lives and in the world. But there also are just a lot of really lively and hilarious students and whatnot. The other set of characters are the faculty and staff at the school and whatnot. And there's some really interesting characters there. There's a male teacher, and like the hotshot of the English department is sort of a younger male character, for instance. And his character arc is extremely interesting and not super common for a movie from this era and whatnot, but really, really strong character. There's another teacher that's just a great character, particularly her exploits at the school dance and whatnot. But the one character that I will be somewhat specific about is the school counselor, who is a great, really just great character. The guidance counselor on day one introduces herself to Sylvia Barrett, finds her in the hall. I'm the guidance counselor, whatnot. You know, if you need me, come to me. Gives the pitch in a way that is, it's kind of hard to put this, but you know, sometimes people introduce themselves to you, and with the facade of being helpful, with the pretense of being a resource or being on your side, and what is actually happening is that they are puffing themselves up, or something, that they are trying to, not necessarily trying to impress you, but trying to instill a certain authority, and whatnot. They're introducing themselves because you have entered their lair, of which they're the king or the queen or something like that. I haven't done a good job of capturing this complex moment. You should just watch the movie. Great character, but the way that she introduces herself is spot on. And then later on, in the movie, Barrett goes to the guidance counselor, actually, to, as she calls it, seek ammunition, which is an extremely interesting idea, that, again, you should watch the movie to really understand how this all works out. But like I said, this Barrett is a complicated character who takes a lot of different approaches towards her students and whatnot. Well, there's a moment where one of her ideas is to go to the guidance counselor to find ammunition, right, to figure out more about her students, figure out what's going on, and whatnot. Perhaps it's a Pandora's box. Maybe you don't want to know. Maybe you have to know. So she goes to the counselor and says, I'd like some info about this student, this student, this student, and this student. And the counselor says, wow, I just think it's great that you're taking the time to use all the information that's available, to what great teachers do or something like that. And Barrett says, oh, yeah, thank you. And you know, ask for the info. And the guidance counselor, rather than getting the folders out, begins to tell her the story of her career and about the great system that she has worked up. And this just, to me, rings so true with people of sort of inflated importance sometimes, who are in these positions of pseudo-authority in organizations, where they have, there's the literal purpose, you know, hey, I'd like to get some information about these students and whatnot. And, you know, one approach would be to say, okay, here is the information. But instead what happens is, okay, here's my life story, and here's this great system I have. And of course, the system is totally bonkers. It's this, like, psychological profiling, basically. The guidance counselor explains, oh, well, you know, this student, you know, is, I forget the exact terms, but some really mumbo-jumbo, meaning misogynist, basically. This other student, you know, exhibits latent homosexual tendencies and whatnot. So this whole system that she has is basically complete BS, which Barrett kind of realizes and whatnot. But overall, this guidance counselor character is both a hoot, but also a real, just a really strong character. And like I said, in all these things, you just get the sense that this movie has to come from somebody who is really there. And that is, strong, strong praise. So overall, like I said, Up the Down Staircase is a phenomenal movie. I think it's the best movie that there is about education in general. If you're going to be a teacher, you got to watch this movie, especially if you're going to do something like Teach for America or something like that. Watch this movie. But even if you've just once been a student, which presumably you have, I still think this is worth watching. It's remarkable how a movie from 1967, how there are some things about high school that have not changed at all, which is maybe a bit alarming. Just so much of the characters, so much of the power dynamics at play are really captured in this movie, as well as our serious social and issues and political issues of the time. So a movie that's a great time capsule of the 60s, but also a movie that's a great sort of universal movie about education, and overall a great movie with really good acting, but kind of a weird score. But oh well, this is Up the Down Staircase from 1967, a movie that I strongly recommend.